You might hear some birds, particularly seagulls, in the background of this little broadcast, and I'm here actually at the bottom of my garden at Fringe Review headquarters, known as The Shed. And this is a couple of months before Brighton Fringe starts. And so it's a good time to be thinking about your strategy for publicising your show, and particularly contacting the press. That's what this particular talk is about. And what should you have done by now, if anything, and what should you be doing? As I record this, we're literally in the week of the final registration deadline to be in the print programme of Brighton Fringe. So we're in the middle to the end of January, although this advice is pretty relevant all year round. You can never really start early with the Fringe, just in terms of thinking through how you're going to describe your show, what images you want for your show. And a lot of companies I've spoken to are getting that stuff together actually before Christmas. Is it worth contacting the press and people you want to come and see your show before Christmas? That's for 5 months before Brighton Fringe. And I think the answer is, if someone receives an email before Christmas, they're not going to reply to it necessarily. They're not even necessarily going to read it. It feels too early, and may even feel a little bit pushy that you're writing to them. So we have had at Fringe Review a few press releases, and certainly we're not irritated by them, but I think they just go in a folder to be looked at later. And probably just because we've got other things coming up, there are other Fringe festivals, they're probably, with limited resources, not going to be looked at. And I think that's probably true even more of the paper press, some of the bigger press that might be covering Brighton Fringe. It's certainly not worth not doing it if you feel that you want to tell people particularly a bit of early news. It could be that your company just won an award, and that they've only just announced or decided to go to Brighton Fringe. So if there's a particular news story that's relevant and there's a reason to write early, then do so. But just saying, hey, we want to tell you about a show that's happening in May, I would leave that till January. And that might even feel too early, but actually that's because I'm going to talk about, I don't know if I'd call it my rule of three, but just in these noisy times of social media and everybody being connected to their phones all the time, but not really registering most of it, I think you probably need to write at least 3 times to the press between January and May. And it's finding that balance between, again, being noisy and pushy and actually genuinely being informative and respecting the fact that things go off people's radar. If you're in a place of irritation, if no one's replied to my email I wrote to them in January, well, be realistic. And, you know, I'm not saying that you have to forgive rudeness, but when people don't reply, it's simply because there's a kind of norm of behaviour that things don't really start kicking in, I think, probably till late February, March and even April for some of the media. But writing in January is not a bad thing to do. It's the new year, and it may just subconsciously go into people's heads, even if they don't read all the material and follow up links that you've written to them. And so it kind of puts in just a little subliminal memory. And again, I think as long as it's good news, and I think it's announcing something, and you're enthusiastic, and you don't have great expectations of being in touch with the press and getting reviews organised then I think you can just write to people. I would keep it minimal. I would not ask too much. I think it's probably a 1-page press release within the email, rather than lots of links to everything else. Though you might link to a piece of film, and you might just catch somebody on a quiet afternoon where you're going to go onto their horizon quickly on their radar, because you've actually written to them and said, look, here's some shots that we've just created, screenshots from our last rehearsal or one of our shows, or this is a YouTube, or here's a show reel of the company or one of the main actors in it, and you might just pique their curiosity, particularly if they've seen work in the past. And if you have been reviewed before by a member of the press, then that is a very good reason just to say, this is our next show, we just wanted to get it on your radar, because that does give them the possibility to put it in their diary. But as I say, if you don't hear from them, that doesn't necessarily mean a thing. Your build-up then starts to go into February and March, and that's where what you need to do is perhaps resend the press release with a very personalised email saying, you may have received this earlier, we're just sending it again in case you missed it. And then as you get into March and April with Brighton Fringe, with the Fringe happening in May, that's when you can enrich that with new images, new news. There may be some reviews in from other places that you've played, and where you're looking to see if you can get really into their schedules quickly. And what you certainly shouldn't be doing is just sending it a week before, and that's the first thing they get to see. So my rule of 3 is to write 3 times The first and the second one should feel a bit similar, that the second one is just checking that they'd seen the first one. The third, possibly the fourth, starts to be more enriched content. All the usual things apply. Do not put 5 GB images attached. Do not have loads of different fonts. Do not have emails that go right across the page about 20 feet. Make sure your carriage returns and formatting is okay. Do not overload people with information. Do not use the word amazing all the time and superlatives. Do not overpromise. Be realistic. Everything apparently these days is groundbreaking, so use very accurate words to describe your show. All the usual things. I think I want to add something else, which is there's a lot of uncertainty in the media at the moment, and with Brexit, which is that word everyone's using, but just people aren't quite sure what's going on. If you're coming from abroad, just make sure that you're confirming to people that you are coming and that there's not going to be any problems and your show is happening. We don't know how this is going to play out with border controls, but the promises are it shouldn't be very disruptive this year at all. Be very, very clear with people what you're hoping they're going to do, and people like to know what the action required is. If it's a review, that's fine. If it's an interview, that's fine. If that interview could be done online, that's fine. But give indications of what you're available to do, and just be aware, if you're a company that has paid a PR, just make sure your PR is on the case and very, very up to date with what you're doing and what's changing for you. So all the usual things apply. We're now here in January. It's not too late to start, and I would get your first announcing sort of email press release out pretty soon, certainly by mid-February, if not before. And don't write with expectations that you're going to get commitment from anyone at this stage. When we get into February and March, that's when your main press release is going to go out. I'd say probably early March. And then when we get into April and May, that's when you can be more specific about just seeing if you can follow up, if there's a review that's available, if you can get a reply. Once again, if you can get their name, that's good too. What I would not do, particularly now, is friend people on Facebook for the sheer purposes of just writing to them to come and see your show. See how they're using Facebook, and it might be better to go through their publications page. I think it is still these days okay to @ people on Twitter, to go directly at people on those social media pages where that's the norm. Certainly do not connect up with people on LinkedIn just again to send them your press release. People don't use LinkedIn for the purposes of being messaged in that way. So also, alongside any emails, use your social media mindfully. Mindfully means think ahead, think about where you're sending, why you're using that particular platform, and whether the response to that is going to be irritated or it's actually going to achieve your purpose. Certainly you can use more than one platform to contact somebody, but I'd suggest with the media at the moment, asking people to come see your show, leaving files with them is probably still done on email. Don't invite them to share Google Docs to access your Dropbox folder. These are the times at the moment of hacking that are going on. So keep things crisp, keep things simple. Make sure you don't end up in the spam folder. You need to test emails out as well. And be sure that if you don't get a reply by March or April, your email could well have gone into the spam folder for whatever reasons of the other person, and you might need to just follow up. I would recommend, unless you've got permission to, you do not text media on their personal mobiles. That can really, really irritate and switch people right off. So sensitivity, we're in January. My rule of 3, find 3 different ways, good ways to email over the next few months, and then top that up where appropriate with any social media. Though I say to message those people unless you've got permission is a risky enterprise. Hope it goes well. This is me signing off. I don't know if you did hear any seagulls, but there's certainly a lot of birds flying around. The skies are blue on a remarkably cold day here in Brighton, a few months before Brighton Fringe.